quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the North Carolina Broadcast Legends Production Fund, including contributions from the following. For a complete list of project funders, go to unctv.org/nclegends.
Welcome to North Carolina Broadcast Legends, featuring industry leaders sharing stories from the rich and significant history of the broadcasting business here in our state. I'm your host, Mike Weeks. Ask yourself, why would a national television network want to start and locate an international news gathering operation in Charlotte, North Carolina? Well, that's an interesting question, and it's a great story we'll share over the next few minutes. Our guest today is the retired president of NBC News Channel, Robert Murray Horner, Jr., known to colleagues and friends as Bob Horner. Bob was born in one of the most American places you can be born, George Washington Hospital in Washington, D.C. He grew up in Northern Virginia and as a teenager got weekend jobs covering high school sporting events for the Washington, D.C. newspapers. Through his newspaper experience, he decided to study journalism, focusing on broadcast news. After college, he served 2 years in the U.S. Army, assigned to American Forces Korea Network in Seoul, South Korea. His Army job? A radio and television news anchor. After the Army, Bob completed his master's degree in communications to begin working at local TV stations as a reporter, news anchor, news producer, and manager. He spent 6 years in local news, 9 years at the CBS Network News, and then joined NBC, where he started NBC News Channel, a Charlotte-based international news gathering operation serving the needs of NBC's affiliate group, a host of international clients in the NBC television network. Bob, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's great to have you here, and you have an interesting bringing up with your parents, and it all was necessary to get to where we got a number of years ago, and we want to tell that story. Your dad was an FBI agent.
He was.
And your mom was a lady from around Macon, Georgia. How did they get together?
After my mother left the farm and spent a couple of years in college, she took a job at a railway station and sold tickets to some bad guys. And the FBI was after them, and they interviewed my mother, and she was able to remember them in some detail and remember the specific time she sold the tickets, and the FBI wanted her to be a witness at their trial. But the trial was in San Francisco, all the way. I'm not sure my mother had ever left the state of Georgia at that point. So they put her on a train to San Francisco, and when she got there, she had to be met by an FBI agent and escorted to the courthouse and watched over during the time of the trial. And that agent was the fellow who was to become my father, Robert M. Horner Sr. And he admitted in later years that he was smitten with her immediately, and when the case was over, he wrote her and asked if he could come see her, and that's when, and she said yes. She had been smitten with him, and that's how they got together, and that's how I ended up here.
Well, that's a great story, and FBI agents travel around, but your father had the good fortune where he took a job at headquarters. So you were in the Washington, D.C. area where you grew up.
Yes, he had been in a number of different cities for the FBI, came to be in an FBI operation that actually does local work, if you will, within the Washington, D.C. area, but the superiors were impressed enough with his performance that they then just moved him to national headquarters in Washington. So we were fortunate that we didn't have to move around the country after I came along, and my brother and sister. We were able to grow up in one place, which is rare for the children of FBI agents.
So how did you get a job in high school reporting for newspapers?
Well, I got interested in my freshman English teacher, I think, said she thought I was a pretty good writer and suggested I go talk to the people at the school newspaper. And they allowed me to start writing for them. And the only thing I was really interested in at that point in my life was I was interested in sports. So I became a sports writer. And in that capacity, I somehow made contact with the Washington papers and said, hey, could I cover games in this part of the state for you? And ended up being able to do that, one for a paper in Northern Virginia, but for the two papers in Washington. So I would go out on Friday nights and Saturday nights and cover games, and in those days you phone them in, or in some cases go down to the office in Washington and write them there.
Well, and it was interesting because, you know, one of the things you had told us was that, you know, when you didn't have a photo necessarily of like the football being kicked through the uprights, you learned some business lessons.
Well, I was working, I don't know if this is a good one or not, but I remember clearly I was working at the Washington Daily News one night, helping to put out the sports section for the Saturday morning paper. And I had covered a game that had been won by a dramatic field goal at the last second. And the photographer got back, developed his picture, and he had taken the photo just a second too late. The football was gone. It was just a guy with his leg in the air. And I went to the editor and I said, well, I don't think we can use this. And he said, well, wait a second. And he reached into his desk and he pulled out photos of other football games and he cut a football out of one of those photographs and then he pasted it in that shot, and that's the way it went in the paper. So I learned a lot that night.
Well, your experience in work for the newspapers, you decided you wanted to study journalism and was interested in broadcasting, and you went away to college. Where did you go to?
Went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism. Growing up in Northern Virginia, there were no private school wasn't in the cards for us, and there was no public university that had an actual journalism degree in the state of Virginia. So I started looking around, and a lot of the people that I had gotten to know on the newspapers had gone to the University of Missouri. It was the nation's oldest school of journalism, the best one, and they urged me to investigate that, and it turned out to be relatively affordable for an out-of-state student. And I applied there and was accepted and went out there. You can't actually study journalism there for your first 2 years. You have to prove you're academically ready, and then in your junior and senior years, it's all journalism. And it was in those years, although I still enjoyed writing, that I got interested in broadcasting and started to concentrate on that side a little more.
Well, this was a time during the Vietnam War, and students were all concerned about the draft.
Yes.
And that's something that concerns you. You did not get drafted throughout school. There were different exemptions and things if you were in school or married, but you got all the way through your undergraduate degree.
Yep.
And then you decided maybe to take some time off and do some traveling.
Well, what happened was before I actually got out of school, the country held the first draft lottery, and I got a number. I think it was draft lottery number 170. I had the pleasure of reading that on the air when we were covering the lottery. So I already knew from information that had already been spread that in my home county, that would mean you would likely get drafted late in the year. So I got a job at a radio station in St. Louis for the summer because nobody would hire me for a permanent job because they knew I'd be drafted, and then wandered around the country a little bit, and finally they called me and I went into the service.
Let's tell people what you did. You were in the area of communications. Tell them what your job was and where you ended up.
Well, I think because I had a journalism degree, the Army in its wisdom assigned me to the Signal Corps, which was fine with me. I started off at Fort Gordon down near Augusta, Georgia, and worked mainly on training videos, that kind of thing, and then got sent overseas to Korea. And when I was first over there, I was at a place up in the vicinity of the DMZ, just in a regular Army unit. I didn't have any Signal Corps duties there. We were just on patrol most of the time. And then a fellow transferred out, and there was the opportunity to apply for a position at the television headquarters the Army ran in Seoul, back in the capital, and I applied for that job and went through an interview process within the Army and was fortunate enough to get that and moved to Seoul, which was considerably easier duty, and ended up anchoring radio newscasts and television newscasts.
Wow. So after the Army, you got your graduate degree, and then you went out into the workplace.
I did. I went because in those days it was extremely difficult to apply for a job from overseas, and although I tried, I couldn't get work for after the Army while I was still sitting in Seoul, South Korea. So when I got back, I decided that I hadn't really started my career. Maybe that would be the opportunity to go to grad school, might help me later on. So I went back to my hometown and went to American University in Washington. And after that, although I was, from Washington, and my dad had had his career, a lot of his career there, I just had a feeling that it would be good for a journalist to live in different parts of the country and not come up totally within the Washington way of thinking. So I got a position at a television station in Wyoming, believe it or not. I traveled a little bit in the West and really loved the West, and so I was happy to take that job. I was a reporter and anchor, and there decided I think I was only 24 years old, but the news director left, and I said, I really like to see if I could play a role in improving the overall product, not just do my own story each night, and applied for that job and got it. And that was really my first step into news management. And after, I think, a little more than 3 years in Wyoming, where I was a news director and reported and anchored and sort of did everything, which was great, I went to a television station in Saginaw, Michigan, and there I did some anchoring, but that's where I really started to concentrate on management as the executive producer, which is sort of the number 2 job in most local newsrooms. And I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to move from Wyoming and that beautiful high country to a state that it's kind of flat and made cars and everything. And but after just a year and a half there, I got a really good opportunity to become a news director in Mobile, Alabama, and we moved there, and I really concentrated on management there, and it was owned by some wonderful local people. And who ran the station in a very professional way, and I learned a lot from them and got the chance to see what I could do as a manager.
Now, we're going to backtrack on one item because there's a very important thing that happened that has a lot to do with your career and other things that happened of note in broadcasting and with the starting of NBC News Channel, and that was your wife, Janae. You got married, I think, while you were in the service, didn't you?
Yes, I got married. We got married not long. Well, I was still based in Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia, but not long before I transferred over to Korea. And in those days, the spouses of enlisted personnel were not permitted to go. So she started her own career while I was also in journalism while I was off overseas. And when I came back and we moved to Washington, she worked as a newspaper reporter, and then worked in other jobs as we traveled around the country, radio and newspapers primarily. And then we both, in a sense, got a break when I worked very closely with CBS News. They had a bureau in Atlanta, and that bureau was responsible for the South. And when I was the news director in Mobile, I was sort of in their territory, and I got to know the people there, and a job opportunity came up, and we decided to move to Atlanta to take that. But it was also the same time that Ted Turner was starting the cable news network in Atlanta.
CNN.
CNN. And Janae was, I think, the 12th person hired at CNN, and she went on to become the editor of international news. She was her first vice president of international news for cable news, and played a big role in their success, because in the early days of cable news, a lot of what attracted people to it was the foreign coverage, which they hadn't seen before on a 24-hour basis. So, and then that was a very challenging career opportunity for her. And then I was getting my first chance to work on a sort of a national basis as opposed to a local basis for CBS News.
So you're working for CBS in their bureau in Atlanta, managing that operation, which had Southeast responsibilities and more. And your wife was working with Ted Turner and on the international news desk, starting the CNN network.
Yep.
Pretty good start for a young couple.
Yes, I think that I look back now and it just seems we were both so young, but we had both had experience in high school, college, and then 3 or 4 jobs in local news. So we were not total rookies, and we felt as if we had been paying our dues and worked our way up to those jobs. And I think we were both aware at the time that we were very, very lucky to have those positions.
You did well in Atlanta, and in fact, CBS wanted to expand your responsibilities. Tell people about that.
Well, I had made sure that when I moved to the Atlanta bureau, that our bureau had very good relations with the local television stations around the country, certainly including those here in North Carolina, by the way, which was part of our territory. And I had made it plain to my bosses that I thought that relationship between the national news and the local newsrooms was very important and deserved more attention, and I made that a priority in my territory. And then they knew that, and when there was an opportunity in New York, they promoted me to a job to provide services to the CBS affiliates. Affiliates obviously do a good job covering local news, but they don't have their own people around the world and around the country, and normally rely on their networks to provide part of that service. And I think CBS realized that the service it had been providing was not very good and that it needed to be better, and they knew I believed in it and that I had good credentials in local news, and now I also had some credentials in network news, and they liked that blending, so they promoted me to do that job.
Well, you were at CBS for a number of years. You were able to maintain your home in Atlanta with your wife and your family and travel, but you decided to go out on your own and be a consultant, a news consultant for local stations and others. And one day you got a phone call from an old friend, Don Brown. What did Don say to you?
Well, Don had been an executive at CBS when I was a CBS affiliate news director. He had since moved on to be the #2 person at NBC News. And I had become a consultant because, ironically, the CBS experience had been my first chance to really build something. It wasn't exactly like the small business people I admire so much who go out and build a company of their own. But within a corporation, I was given a lot of freedom and enjoyed kind of building something, and I got some taste of entrepreneurship, and that's why I wanted to go off and start my own consultancy. And I enjoyed that, did that for a couple of years, and Don just called me up one day and said, "We haven't talked in a while, are you still consulting local stations?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, look, I am having trouble getting my boss, who's the #1 fellow at NBC News, to understand the importance of the local stations. As a personal favor, would you come up here and talk to him? And because you could explain it better than anyone else I know." And I owed Don a lot. He'd always been good to me. And I said, "Sure." So I flew up to New York and talked to them, had a good meeting with his boss, a fellow named Michael Gartner, and they eventually asked if I would become a consultant for NBC News and to write a report and make suggestions on how they could improve their relationships with local stations. And I did that. It took me a while to do it, and turned in that report. And that report, they decided to act on it and actually put it into effect.
Well, and it went further than that. They asked you to recommend some people to put this concept in place, and they ended up hiring you.
Well, I was not sure that I wanted to come back into the corporate world. I was enjoying kind of being my own boss, but I realized that it was just such a rare opportunity that just doesn't come along very much in television news to really do something from the ground up, a blank slate. They promised and delivered on their promise to give me a wide degree of freedom, and that I realized that I had enjoyed being a consultant, but I missed being involved in daily news coverage, and I knew I could return to that, but also build an operation over the years to come that would be really good at it, and I'd enjoy that challenge too. So I took the job and came on board to do it, and one of the first things they asked me to do was to figure out where to put it. My thesis when I presented my report to them was that they should not put it in New York or Washington, the traditional media centers, but put it someplace that's a little bit more like the rest of the country, and where the staff to be would be able to relate more effectively with local television stations, understand the way the news looks outside the big media centers, and I thought that would be more compatible with local news relationships, and also take advantage of not having to pay the outrageously high cost in places like New York and Washington, and take money that up there gets spent on real estate and use that same amount of money to invest in actual news content. So that had been my argument. They said yes, and I wandered around the country, certainly with some help trying to find a good place, and ultimately recommended Charlotte, North Carolina. And to their credit, the fellow who was running, in those days NBC was owned by General Electric, and the fellow running the company was a longtime, highly respected General Electric executive. And he said, you know, I know Charlotte very well. He said, I worked on the financial side for GE. I used to go to Charlotte a lot, talk to all those big banks down there. I think Charlotte's growing. I think it's going to continue to grow. He was familiar with the whole I-85 corridor story from roughly Greenville, South Carolina, up to Raleigh and past, and how healthy that economy was. And he said that GE liked the fact that it was starting to locate all of its customer service businesses in the Southeast, where they said they found people were better at it, were nicer to people on the phone, were more into it. They'd found good employees in the Southeast. And in this very interesting GE kind of way, he said, you're really proposing to be the customer service unit of NBC News, to help all these affiliates, and who are not owned by the company, by the way, but are owned by other companies, to help them and build relationships with them. And I like Charlotte, I like North Carolina, I like the notion of a customer service business there, and so this thing is going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I look back on it now, and I smile, because there are all these people in the room who have been prepared to study this for months. and he just said, okay, I thought about it, it's going to Charlotte.
It's going to go to Charlotte.
Next. And
yeah.
so that was really good that he...
That's how those decisions are made.
And he gained us a lot of time
Yeah.
by just making a decision, and that's how we ended up in this great state.
Well, we only have just a very few minutes left,
Yeah.
Bob. You built a team, over 100 employees in Charlotte, and a very strong part of the fabric of broadcasting in North Carolina. All of the broadcast stations benefited in North Carolina from what you did, and a tremendous story. And in fact, Bob and I did a long-form interview, about 2 hours in length. And if you would like to see a lot more of the details and how NBC News Channel got started, you could go to the website at ncbroadcastlegends.com. Again, that's ncbroadcastlegends.com to see our full length, long-form interview. The other thing about Charlotte I think is interesting is its geographic location was perfect for satellite reception. So your international news desk and your distribution to your affiliates and everyone else, it was a great geographic location, as well as a great place to live.
Well, the state, and Charlotte in particular, I think the whole state is great. It was not hard to attract people to come to North Carolina. There were a lot of great employees from North Carolina, And that's one of the reasons I thought it would make sense. I knew that there was such a strong base of local broadcasting that we'd be able to hire good people with experience at those stations. And then I knew it would not be hard to get people to come to a nice place like North Carolina when I recruited them nationally. And fortunately, I did get that right.
Well, it was a great organization. It continues to be a great organization. You've retired from there and are taking it easy, but you spent 27 years as president. You were the founder, I guess. You started it. You were the consultant that presented the concept. Bob Wright said, let's go to Charlotte, and you did. And you started hiring people, and you started off with 20, and it's been such a fabric of the North Carolina community ever since. Bob, we really want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank our guest, Bob Horner, for sharing part of his story and contributions to the great state of North Carolina and to news all over the world. And if you want to see our long-form interview, go to ncbroadcastlegends.com. That's ncbroadcastlegends.com. Bob, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Please join us for another edition of North Carolina Broadcast Legends.
Funding for this program is provided in part by the North Carolina Broadcast Legends Production Fund, including contributions from the following: For a complete list of project funders, go to unctv.org/nclegends.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.